My name is Munaza Aslam, and I am the Research Director for DARE RC. It's an absolute honor and privilege Pauline Rose and Dr. Laraib Niaz joining us today. I just wanted to take this opportunity to explain why this particular webinar is so important for the work that DARE RC is doing. When we think about the DARE RC vision, we are aiming to build a research ecosystem that supports inclusive, coherent, and resilient education systems in Pakistan that ensure access, quality, and continuity for all children. With a very steadfast focus on marginalized learners. DARE RC emphasizes generation of evidence on what works to build education systems that cater to diverse needs and foster equitable opportunities to empower learners to thrive in a rapidly changing world. Now, realizing this vision requires a lot of things, but very importantly, it requires contextually grounded and high quality evidence that can inform both policy and practice. Now, as part of that, we want to generate actionable evidence that is robust, empirically sound, but also Pakistan-led and Pakistan-owned. And in doing so, it informs approaches to ensuring equitable learning for all in the long term. Now, this piece of research that we have being presented today is especially critical in light of the vision that DARE RC has. And it maps out the education research background portfolio, so to speak, of high quality research in Pakistan, looking at the trends, gaps, and policy pathways over the last 10 years or so. And in doing so, it tells us, where the gaps exist, what are the key trends in the publication of high quality evidence in Pakistan, and how DARE RC can help fill some of those. In the interest of time, I will just hand over to the host of this webinar, Dr. Sahar Shah, who will then introduce the presenters and ask them to present. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Over to you, Sahar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Munaza, for that informative introduction. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, according to your time zone. Welcome to our third webinar, Mapping Pakistan's Education Research, Evidence, Gaps, and Steps to Increase Impact. This webinar is part of the series of DARE RC webinars on building communities of practice in education. I'm Dr. Sahar Shah. I'll be your moderator today. A few protocols for the webinar. You may share your comments respectfully in the active chat box. Our presenters will present the content during the first half of the webinar, and we will take questions posted in the chat box with a capital Q towards the latter half of the webinar. So let's begin. We're joined today by two exceptional researchers who have been supporting this program, DARE RC, since a long time. Good morning, Professor Pauline. It's good morning for you. Hence, in Pakistan, it's good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Professor Pauline is the director of the Real Center at the University of Cambridge. She is a globally respected voice in education reform who leads cutting-edge research on tackling injustice in and through education. Good morning to Dr. Laraib Niaz. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Laraib. Dr. Niaz is a postdoctoral researcher at the Real Center, University of Cambridge. She is a leading voice in inclusive education and brings global insights on gender, disability, and religion in schooling. Now, just before we begin, I would like our audience to share your role and location with us quickly to get a quick snapshot of where you're from and what do you do, and are you a researcher, a policy maker, a teacher, a student? So we are just going to share a poll. We launch a poll and you have 30 seconds to respond. Please take a moment to respond. It will be nice to know where you're from. Yes, if you didn't hear me, there's a poll. We're having a live poll right now. So you can submit your occupation, your basic role, what you do and which country. Okay, so we have one response, a UK researcher, excellent. Wonderful, we have the responses coming in. So you just have it for 30 seconds. So yeah, people from UK and Pakistan, researchers, lecturers, strategic advisor, a researcher from EU, European Union. Wonderful. Okay, we have someone from the health and a student. Excellent. This is great to know. So Mariam, maybe you can inform us when the poll ends. Okay, the poll is closed. Okay, so 13 responses, and we have people from UK and Pakistan and 7 from EU as well. So welcome all of you, and thank you for responding. So we'll just now immediately start with this very interesting scoping review based on that maps 173 education research outputs from Pakistan-based scholars between 2015 and 2025. There are many interesting findings emerging from this review, so let's dive deeper with our authors. Very briefly, Dr. Laraib, could you share the main question, objectives, and methodology used to conduct this scoping review? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sahar. It's lovely to be here. And also, thank you for such a lovely introduction for both me and Pauline. This is a work that is very personally close to us. And it's inspired by some previous work that the Real Center has done with Education Sub-Saharan Africa. And that work focused on Sub-Saharan Africa, and they basically created a database called the AERD, which was an education research database, which basically mapped the research that was coming out from researchers based in Sub-Saharan Africa. So it was a great way of cataloging locally driven contextual research. And then when DARE RC started, and it was the vision of DARE RC is so heavily focused on promoting Pakistani research and research on education, that we realized that this is something that would be of interest, particularly also because researchers in the global south and low and middle income countries face a lot of structural barriers when it comes this includes limited access to funding, insufficient institutional support, barriers related to language and editorial standards. So our idea was that we want to map these barriers, but importantly, we want to show what kind of research is coming out of Pakistan from Pakistani researchers specifically. And the idea is to increase the visibility of education research outputs by scholars that are based in Pakistan. So for this, our review was motivated by 3 challenges. One was visibility. We know that much of the research that is produced in Pakistan does not reach international audiences or gain traction in citation indices, and which limits its credibility and uptake. And we thought that if we make a database and if we present findings from this, maybe it will help in increasing the visibility of this research as well. Second was policy relevance. We wanted to strengthen the understanding of how this locally produced research aligns with the national education policy, the sustainable development goals, and this is essential for enhancing its impact, its relevance. And finally, we wanted to focus on capacity strengthening, which is also a big aim of DARE RC. We thought that mapping the geography, the themes, and the institutional affiliations of research that is coming out of Pakistan could help identify areas that require targeted capacity development. I know that you asked about the methodology as well. So could we go on to the next slide? Then I can explain how we went on about this research. So basically, we used a protocol that was adapted from the African Education Research Database, which, as I mentioned before, was conducted by ESSA and the Real Center. We used this protocol to have a series of inclusion and exclusion criterion. So our main database that we focused on were Web of Science and Scopus, and we had this these criterias. Number 1 was we wanted articles published in international peer-reviewed journals, academic books, or as conference proceedings, but indexed in international platforms, international journals. So any articles that were published in local journals or national journals were not included. And I know there might be a question on why we have not included it, but the idea was that for this paper, we were particularly focusing on the international journals to see the international relevance and uptake of research, but any following research would focus on the local and national journals as well. Our other inclusion criteria was that at least one author needs to be affiliated with a Pakistani-based institution. And if there are no authors based, even if they're Pakistani but not based with a Pakistani institution, then those articles would not be selected. Our articles also focused on pre-primary, primary, and secondary education, as well as alternative pathways. What we did not focus on was higher education, tertiary education, or adult education. We also particularly focused on articles that had a policy relevance, which meant that articles that are purely theoretical with no clear policy relevance were not chosen. Once we used this criteria, we came up with 173 articles, as Sahar mentioned, and then we worked on data extraction and coding. So we looked at the bibliographic information, which included the author information, their demographic characteristics, gender, location, institutional affiliation. We did a thematic classification that I will talk more about later on. We looked at the methodology, the citation data, the funding, and the collaboration patterns. And our analytical approach was focused on descriptive statistics, a more thematic analysis of the kind of themes, kind of areas that were covered in the articles, and a regional breakdown to assess the geographical spread of the research and highlight any provincial representation and clustering. So overall, that was our methodology. I hope that answers your question. Sahar?
Excellent. No, that's very informative, very detailed and clear. So, according to your review, how have patterns of publications changed over the last year? It would be nice to share, and I'll just straighten the slide.
Thank you for the question, Sahar. So as we can see in the slide, the review is from 2015 to 2024. We actually included the first 4 months of 2025 as well, from Jan to April, but we found only 8 publications in that year. And we thought that if we include that in the graph, it doesn't really reflect the publication process of this year. So we've excluded that and we focused on 2015 to 2024. One thing that I didn't mention previously was that in our methodology, our one inclusion criteria was also that the research needs to be in the past 10 years. So a total of 173 education-focused research publications were found. Out of these, 84% were peer-reviewed journal articles, 13% for book chapters, and 3% for published conference proceedings. As you can see in terms of the trends, there has been a steady increase in the number of publications coming out from Pakistani-based authors, scholars. There was a low point, notably in 2017, which marked the lowest point in outputs, which was just 6 publications. And afterwards, there has been a steady and gradual increase, which peaked in 2021 with 24 publications. There was a sharp dip in 2022, and even though we haven't gone into the reasons behind the research trends because we've not spoken to authors and it was beyond the scope of the research, but it could possibly because of the lag due to COVID-19 that there was a dip in publications in 2022 to 16 publications. But since then, we have seen an upward rise with 36 publications, which is the highest recorded output in 2024. I also do want to mention here that in terms of the peer-reviewed journal articles that we looked at, they were spread across a range of international journals. The most predominant ones there were Cogent Education, there was Sage Open, Frontiers in Education, and Compare. And education sciences. So there were a couple of journals that had multiple outputs from Pakistani scholars in terms of the international publications. And in terms of the citations as well, which are not shown over here, but there has been an increase in the number of citations overall as well that the publications are getting.
Very interesting findings. Thank you, Laraib, for that and the research, sharing the research trends. So what did you find were the main areas of thematic focus for these publications, and what do these suggest about the current research priorities and the connection to policy needs? And I'll just also...
Thank you for the
Yes.
question,
Hmm.
Sahar.
Hmm.
Before coming on to what these thematic priorities were, I do want to explain how we came to these thematic priorities. So we initially divided the publications according to whether they're focusing on pre-primary education, primary, secondary, etc. And then we started looking at the keywords. So we found keywords for out of the 173 publications. We had keywords for 151 publications. 22 did not have any keywords. So for those 151 publications, we first created a word cloud, and then we looked at the frequency with which certain words, certain keywords were being used. So there were lots that were used repeatedly, such as COVID-19, teachers' education, teachers, sustainable development, professional development, distance learning, AI, academic performance. So we did an analysis of those keywords, and based on those keywords, we came to these seven thematic priorities. I do want to mention here that a lot of the keywords were about early childhood education as well, but we didn't categorize that over here because that came under the levels of education. So in terms of early childhood education, we saw that there, even though pre-primary early childhood education had less of a focus than primary and secondary, the focus was increasing. So more and more publications in the more recent years, so in the last 5 years, were focusing on early childhood education. In terms of the seven thematic priorities and the areas that we developed, there is curriculum and policy, which focused on policy reform, but also textbooks and textbook design, school governance, etc. Then we had teacher education and pedagogy, which included anything and everything related to teacher education, assessment and outcomes. And then there was technology and innovation, crisis and emergency, gender and social inclusion, and disability inclusive education. We made sure that we weren't lumping them together under the one category of inclusive education, because there was the research that was focusing on disability inclusive education wasn't looking at intersectionality and was just focusing on disability. And that's why we thought that these are two big broad areas that needed to be separated out. So in terms of the thematic distribution, the most prominent theme was technology and innovation. 25% of the articles focused on technology and innovation, which reflected a strong research focus on, so for instance, digital learning tools, online education, ICT integration in classrooms and in teacher training. So this does align with Pakistan's increasing emphasis on edtech under the Digital Pakistan vision, and also SDG 4.4. The second most prominent theme was teacher education and pedagogy, which had 22% of the publication. And there was a lot of attention on, there were a lot of articles on teacher training, teacher attitudes, their classroom practice, their professional development. Then gender and social inclusion was the third most prominent theme. This accounted for 15% of the total publications, followed by curriculum and policy at 12%. Then there was disability inclusive education at 9%, crisis and emergency at 9%, and the lowest focus was on assessment and outcomes, which was only 8%, despite its high importance in both SDG and national education policy goals. I do want to add here that even though technology and innovation had the most number of articles, we also did an analysis of the average number of citations per publication for each of these themes. So publications actually associated with crisis and emergency had the largest number of citations per publication. So each publication had around 12 citations, even though it had one of the lowest proportions of publications. So our idea was that perhaps a lot of those articles were focusing on COVID-19, and maybe that's why they had such a high citation rate. Technology and innovation was actually second with 11 citations per publication, but it was actually crisis and emergency that had the most number of citations, which I thought was an interesting finding.
Yes, these are really interesting findings. Thank you for sharing those with us. So, what types of research methods did you find were most prominent among these studies in these publications?
So in terms of research methods, overall, 81 of the studies were using qualitative methods, 75 were using quantitative methods, and 14 were employing mixed methods. We also did so this was the overall methodology, but we also did an analysis of what kind of specific methods were being used. And as you can see in the graph, surveys were predominant, followed by semi-structured interviews, and then came content analysis, secondary data sets. So in terms of the research methodology, we also did an analysis of the distribution of the research methods across the level of schooling. And we found that for pre-primary education, most of the publications used qualitative methods. For primary and secondary, it was the same. But for secondary, there was still a mix of both quantitative and qualitative research methods. And in terms of the research themes, we also again looked at which research theme had used what kind of methods. And so teacher education and pedagogy had the most number of quantitative studies, followed by technology and innovation. Gender and social inclusion, crisis and emergency, curriculum and policy, all of these themes had publications that used more qualitative research methods, such as semi-structured interviews, such as focus group discussions. We also obviously looked at the breakdown of the specific methods. And as I mentioned, surveys were the most used methods. But they were more interactive or field-intensive methods, such as focus group discussions, case studies, and pre- and post-test experiments. They had less of a focus, and very few studies applied classroom observation or action research, and especially participatory workshops, which we were a little surprised by, because we thought that there is an increase in focus on participatory methods. So we expected more studies to be using those methods, but that focus was a lot less. And overall, there was a predominance of surveys and interviews. And then after that, there was content analysis of the education policies.
Thank you so much for that. And as Dr. Munaza just pointed out, very interesting to see just one randomized control trial among these publications. So what regional patterns do you see in the publications, and what implications do you think this distribution of research has for building an evidence base that informs national level policy making?
We can go on to the next slide. So in terms of the geographical representation, as you can see from the slide, 48 of the studies are classified as national. So these are studies that are not focusing on any particular province, but are generally looking at national level policies, and or maybe had was conducting some primary analysis, or was analyzing secondary data set, but countrywide and not focused on particular provinces. But in terms of the research that focused on particular provinces, Punjab dominated. They had the highest number of studies, which was 36, followed by Sindh, which had 19, KP, which had 13, and Balochistan. And a smaller number of studies were focused on the Islamabad Capital Territory, FATA, and Azad Kashmir. I do want to mention here that in terms of the studies focusing on Sindh, a lot of them were published by some particular institutions, and that was the Aga Khan University, which led with 17 studies. So even within Punjab and Sindh and KP, there were some institutions that were leading the publications. So this kind of geographical distribution basically shows that a lot of the research that is coming out of Pakistan is focusing on the provinces that have more. I mean, for instance, it's Punjab, so the provinces that do have more resources, whereas there is less research, less prominence of universities and of research from Balochistan, from FATA, from Azad Kashmir. We did see that there was an increase in research that was coming out of KP, and there was an increase in the research coming out of Sindh as well. So there is a comment, I can see that KP and FATA should be combined. In that sense, then it would become 20. But with that also, I do want to mention that this this focus was increasing over time. I'm sorry, there's a lot of noise in the background. Do you hear anything from my background?
No, nothing. We can hear nothing from your background, just
There's
your
some
voice.
construction happening, so I couldn't hear my own voice.
No. So are you continuing?
Yeah.
You've
So
covered the slide. Okay,
yeah.
so yes, we're having interesting comments from the audience as well. Those who join in late, we will have a Q&A session once the presentation is over by the presenters. How would you describe the patterns of collaboration observed, both internationally and across provinces for these publications? And what do they suggest for the research landscape in Pakistan?
So out of the 173 research outputs, 66 involved international collaboration, and around 35 involved cross-country collaboration. The rest had no collaboration. But I do want to mention over here that a lot of the publications were not solo authored. A lot of them were authored with multiple authors, but they were usually belonging to the same institution. So for instance, they were researchers from LUMS or researchers from AKU or Abdul Bali Khan University that were there were multiple researchers who were authors for the same publication, but there were very few publications that were from just a solo author. So in terms of patterns of collaboration, we see that the number of articles that had international collaboration was steadily increasing. There were some dips between 2015 to 2021, but since then there has been an increase in the number of international collaborations. If you can go on to the next slide, then I can talk about what these collaborations entailed. So in terms of the international collaborations, we also did a country analysis of which countries were the researchers from Pakistan were collaborating with researchers and organizations from which countries. And in these, the US and UK dominated, but it was also interesting to see a lot of collaborations with researchers in Malaysia, in Saudi Arabia, in China. And these were, I do want to mention that these were all collaborations, particularly for Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, and China. These were collaborations with academic institutions, universities in these countries. In terms of, and then there were collaborations that with a lower number with other countries such as UAE, Australia, Indonesia, Canada, Germany, Norway, etc. I do now also want to talk about some of the domestic collaborations as well, because out of the total 35 local collaborations, 17 were within a single province, which was KP, while 18 spanned across provinces or involved national level institutions. So these within KP, these collaborations were strong with repeated linkages between institutions such as University of Malakand, University of Haripur, Sarhad University, University of Peshawar, Abdul Bali Khan University, Bacha Khan University. And then there were a lot of cross-provincial and national level collaborations, but these typically involved more research-oriented institutions. For example, LUMS was involved in partnerships across provinces, including with the Karachi School of Business and Leadership. The University of Management and Technology also partnered with institutions in Punjab, in Sindh, and in KP. And so the provinces that did not appear much in the province that did not appear much in these cross-provincial collaborations was Balochistan. So I thought that was something that should be flagged.
Very interesting insights. Thank you, Laraib. And would you also shed light on the pattern in terms of male and female authorship and how this has changed over time during the 10 years that were reviewed? And I'll also change the slide.
Okay. I can see that I need to leave some time for question and answers as well, so I'll be a little quick with this. In terms of authorship and gender, we can see that the number of female authors have been steadily increasing. In total, female authorship comprised 41% overall, with a total of 345 male and 241 female authors. Now, many of these authors were ones who had multiple publications. So this is accounting for repeated authorship. The difference between male and female authors was the highest in 21, with 71 male authors and 35 female authors. So from this, we can see a gap between the number of male authors and the female authors. But one interesting finding was that even over the period, there were 102 publications that had first authors who were male and 72 publications that had first authors who were female. But in 2024, for the first time, the number of female authors surpassed the female first authors surpassed the number of male first authors. So even though the total number of male authors was more in 2024, the number of female first authors was more in the same year.
That's extremely exciting to see female authorship growing in Pakistan. Excellent. So finally, and most importantly, if you were to prioritize 3 recommendations for DRRC's thematic areas to focus on next, what would they be based on this review?
Thank you for that question. And I think it's something that we can pose to the audience as well as to what they think are the, the main recommendations that are coming out of this. But so I don't have 3, but I'll talk about a couple. I think there are 3 that come under DARE's agenda of effective data use, and then there are some that come under scalable solutions. So for effective data use, I do think that it's important to promote methodological diversity rather than just focusing on surveys and interviews. So especially something like participatory and rigorous designs, or as Munaza mentioned, randomized control trials. I haven't been able to talk about funding in this in this session, but there was, for a lot of the articles, there was no funding information available. So I would encourage more transparency in funding sources and research design, and broader institutional collaboration across the provinces. That includes all provinces. I would also suggest that there should be more investment in research from underrepresented regions and underrepresented themes. For instance, assessmented outcomes, or for instance, Balochistan, and the priority of policy relevant and underexplored topics. And again, one big recommendation would be to strengthen this cross-provincial and cross-institutional collaboration. And considering the funding cuts that are happening right now worldwide, having the government involved in providing funding for research as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And yes, this question is also directed towards the audience. So we are going to just open a poll quickly, and we would really want to hear from the audience. Share your response in 30 seconds of which areas of research, priority areas, should receive immediate attention by DRRC according to your role or region or your understanding of what sort of areas need to be researched upon. So dear audience, whoever is with us right now, it will be nice to hear from you. Please type in your response. This poll is active for about 30 seconds, I suppose. So any research priority areas that you would like to see research being done under the DRRC program? Okay, we have responses coming in. Excellent. Quality education, access, climate change, teachers education. Wonderful. Assessments. Change education. Okay, we have 13 responses, and I think the poll just closed. So, okay, interesting information for us, and we've taken note of this, definitely, and we'll see if we can focus on these areas in our research studies in the future. So now, thank you so much, Dr. Laraib. That was wonderful. The information that you've shared, extremely useful in this short span of time. And we have 25 minutes so for Q&A. So dear audience, please post your questions in the chat box with a Q, capital Q, for our presenters. And our co-host, Faryal, will be curating the questions. So it will be nice to respond to whatever queries you have. All right. So we already have a few questions with us.
There are some questions already, yeah, in the
yes,
chat.
Yes,
so
I can see that. Yes, Laraib and Dr. and Professor Pauline, over to you. So there's a question by Dr. Amna Ansari. Many thanks, Laraib, for explaining the process of arriving. Maybe you can read it out yourself and respond to it.
Yeah, no,
It's
Sahar, I
pretty
think
long.
maybe because I've been
Yes.
because you two have been very active in the presentation, I've been keeping an eye on the chat as we've been going along. So thank you, Sahar and Laura. I think that was very stimulating, and I can see from the chat that there's some things. But Laura and others, please do come in. So yes, Amna had put a question in the chat about the interest in the expansion in early childhood publications and whether we did any sort of look at what the themes were. Because the overall number of publications was relatively low, looking at it cross-sectionally across the sort of levels of education and themes would make the numbers of publications even lower. But Lara, I can't remember whether we did that or we decided that it was too low for the... Okay, you go ahead, then you've got the answer.
We did that, and I do want to mention that our the report is coming out on Friday. It has all of the details, it has all of the tables, but just to give an idea, as Pauline mentioned, the numbers are very low, but we could see that for technology and innovation, and for assessment and outcomes, and for teacher education and pedagogy, most of the articles were focused on secondary level of education. For the rest of the themes, there was an equal mix. Some were primary, some were early childhood based, and some were secondary. And I know that you particularly focus on pre-primary as well. So the themes that had the most number of pre-primary related articles were teacher education and pedagogy, technology and innovation, and gender and social inclusion. But these were only 3. So as Pauline mentioned, the number is quite low.
And maybe just picking up a sort of few comments that I think there's sort of a related issue on, but we can come back to specifics. So in particular, the last question by Ali about the number seems quite low. Remember that our focus is on those that have been published in international peer-reviewed journals. So it was, again, as Laraib said, the full methodology is in the paper, but it was based on those that can be identified through Web of Science and Scopus. This does not include publications published in national journals or through working papers, which obviously are important. It's not saying those aren't important, but we were wanting to look at this sort of on the sort of comparable international stage. So I think that probably relates to some of the other questions. So there was a question about why does Aga Khan University IED have greater number of publications than Sokha IBA University. I think that's probably related to that, but Laura, you might have another answer to that. And
no, I completely for this one, I completely agree with Pauline. I don't know, I can't remember the exact number for IBA Sokha. It is in the report and it's in the Excel sheet that accompanies the report. There were a lot of publications from there as well, but then it depends on whether it's in an international peer-reviewed journal. And then these are researchers based at the university. So, different researchers are doing different work, are collaborating with different people. Some researchers had multiple publications. So that kind of pattern also matters. So it's the idea is that it's possible that there might be more publications coming out of IBA Sokha as compared to AKU, but for this particular search criteria, AKU had more publications. So they might be, IBA Sokha's might be in national journals or might be very theoretical in focus. So these are very policy oriented, research based articles that we've particularly looked at.
And perhaps related to that, a question that was there on why wouldn't we look at higher education? We were keeping within the scope of DRRC, so it's not to say higher education isn't important, but it might be that some universities are more specialised in higher education and they wouldn't be captured in these searches. Again, not saying anything about the importance. There's another question on, obviously we weren't ourselves reviewing the quality of the publications, but any comments on the as output has grown on the quality of the outputs. I think because these are all in international peer-reviewed journals, that's our proxy for them having a certain level of quality, because they will have gone through quite a rigorous peer review process. And so I think we sort of can be confident that any of those that we're talking about will have a comparable quality, whether it's in the last 5 years. So there's been an expansion in quantity within these bounds of quality. I don't know, Laraib, if you want to add anything on that.
I think that summarizes it well.
Okay, and let's see for any other questions.
I see there is a question on, I was very interested in the research on disability inclusion. What was the major theme of it? Was it more focused on physical related? So a lot of the research on disability inclusion was on identification of children with disabilities. There were some articles that were using the Washington group questions. And so it was not specific to any kind of disability, but generally more focused on the identification of children with disabilities, whether they're enrolled in schools or not. Then there were some on teachers' preparation. So there was an overlap between teacher education and disability inclusive education. And there were some articles on how prepared teachers are for catering to the needs of children with disabilities in the classroom. There were very few studies that were particularly focusing on a particular form of disability. So for instance, inclusion of children with cognitive disabilities in the classroom. So that was, we thought, a gap.
Thanks. Ali, you've asked us to revisit our data. I suggest maybe when you have a chance to look at the paper, because it's quite difficult to say everything in the context of a webinar. I'm happy to then see what questions you have. It went through quite a rigorous process of identifying and selecting publications. There's a question there on the importance of school leadership. Lara, do you recall any areas of research around school leadership that came up in the review?
They were there. There were articles definitely on school leadership, and I think we've put them under a particular theme. So it was just one second.
People can just look at
it's
the
coming
report
under
when
school.
it comes
It's
out.
coming under, yeah, but it's coming under curriculum and policy.
Excellent. I think it's very hard to summarize all the work that has gone into this. So I think this is, we are very much looking forward to sharing the final report with you. All the details of the work that has been done are in there. I did also want to kind of come in, if it's okay. There's a comment that they would like DARE RC to research on foundational literacy and numeracy. Yes, DARE RC is working in the foundational literacy and numeracy area. Please look out for our updates. We are specifically looking at that in Sindh, but these are areas that we are definitely working on. I just wanted to check if there was anything else in terms of questions.
Yeah, there's one that Sahar has just put about, and I think you've got to the crux, Sahar, of what we're in a sense trying to do here, is that you've got a question about how this research is then being taken up and used by policymakers. And just linking with the work that we've been doing for the Africa Education Research Database, and why with Niaz and colleagues in DARE RC, we were keen to sort of do this, is exactly for that reason. We're aware that it can be the same research that gets referred to by policymakers, and this isn't necessarily those who are based in Pakistan. It's not necessarily actually related to the spectrum of universities that are there, the spectrum of type of research that's there, because policymakers can keep going back to the same pieces of work or the same people that they feel comfortable with referring to. So very much the intention of this was to show there is a breadth of work out there. There's more diversity in terms of what's being published, who's publishing, where it's being published. So we're hoping that through this DARE RC we'll be able to help ensure that visibility of researchers beyond what one might call the usual suspects. So that's a very, very good question that I think maybe can hand back over, Manaza.
Thank you so much. Sahar, I don't know. I think that's a lot of questions that have actually been answered by the researchers. So I wonder if you had anything else that you wanted to discuss with them or anything else. Otherwise, I think we can just wrap up in the next couple of minutes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Naza. Thank you, Dr. Laraib and Professor Pauline, for this wonderful webinar as usual. We don't have any other questions except that we would like our audience to fill up a feedback form. A link and a QR code is being displayed. I hope all of you can see it on your screens. So it would be nice to hear your feedback on the webinar. And yes, the scoping review, the paper will be uploaded on the DARE RC website and will be shared with all those who registered for this webinar. The link will be shared with all of us by Friday. We have webinars in the pipeline coming up in November and then January and February, and we will be sharing the publishing posts soon with you related to the work being done under DARE RC. But thank you so much for joining us. If you have any other questions, I don't know if there is a burning question, maybe you can share it just right now, or then otherwise we can let our presenters leave. So I'll just give you a minute and please do share your feedback via the feedback form.
Thank you so much, Sahar. Just to say thank you very much, Laraib and Pauline. If there's anything in conclusion you wanted to add before we left, please feel free to say now. Thank you so much. I think this is an excellent piece of research for DARE RC, and I'm really, really looking forward to sharing the full report by the end of this week with everyone.
Just to say, I think it's just very exciting to see the range of research that's out there, the range of universities that are publishing, and really hope that it helps to draw attention further to all of that amazing research.
I don't know, Professor Pauline, would you want to take questions from the two raised hands? So we have some participants who have their hands raised. It would be nice if you could just type in your question in the chat box, maybe, to save time. Also, the recording will be available for this webinar. Yes, we will be publishing it on our social media platforms. There's a question in the chat box. So maybe
sorry, I was looking at the chat and there was this one question that we didn't address. It's on whether we did any analysis on political interference in higher education institutions, and the answer to that is no. That was beyond the scope of the research. We were just doing a mapping exercise, but I'm sure that would be a very interesting to see as well.
So Hafsa, maybe you would want to share your question. You want to type it in the chat box. I see your hand raised, Hafsa Zafar.
This one is for Munazza.
Does DARE RC support researchers in any way? So yes, we have open calls for proposals that we have been having for the past year. So we have invited, we advertise them through various platforms. So that's the way we can support researchers. It's a competitive process. You bid for it, and if you are successful, your research will be funded. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Yes, you can look out for any possible further calls for proposals over the next couple of weeks. Thanks.
Thank you for that question, Hafsa, and thank you, Dr. Munazza, for the response. So we'll wait for another minute before we log off.
Thank you. I'll just answer. Ali Nawab has been quite prolific with his questions. So just in response, we can't provide feedback, I'm afraid, to proposals because we receive, I think, 300. And there's a very rigorous process that we go through. So unfortunately, much as we would wish to and want to, we are not in a position to individually respond. But we do encourage researchers to keep applying. And, you know, we have a very, very rigorous process that we go through. So please, based on what you have seen, if there's a new call for proposals, do invest time and energy to apply, and you will go through the same process that everyone goes through, and hopefully, you know, be successful. Thank you. very much, everyone. I think, Sahar, we can close this now. Thank you very much to all the participants, to Pauline, to Laraib especially. Please look out for our social media posts, go to our website, look out for the publications, for the webinars that we have, and we very much look forward to having you attend again in next month's webinar, which will be advertised soon. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.